A lot of people come to faith expecting something cinematic, a moment, a breakthrough, a light from heaven that knocks them flat and rearranges everything at once, leaving no doubt about what just happened. And when that moment never arrives, they start to wonder if anything happened at all. Maybe they prayed wrong. Maybe they weren't sincere enough. Maybe God reached for other people, but somehow passed them by. That expectation quietly wounds more people than we like to admit. Because not everyone gets a Damascus Road. Not everyone gets knocked to the ground by a blinding light they can point back to forever. Some people do. A sharp break. A sudden confrontation that splits a life into before and after. That's real, and I won't take it from them. But I don't believe it's the only way change comes. And I'm not saying this from the outside. I never got the lightning myself. No blinding road, no single hour that split my life clean in two. So when I tell you the quiet way is real, I've lived it. I don't even think it's the usual way. For most people, faith doesn't begin as impact. It begins as orientation, a small turn, a slow correction, a degree at a time towards something they can't yet name. Something they can't fully explain, but can't fully ignore either. And that matters, because if you're waiting for instant transformation, you can miss the quieter forms of grace. You can overlook the fact that your life is changing simply because it isn't changing like a movie. You can move in the right direction and still feel unsteady, turn toward what's true and still feel torn. You can be healing and still feel like a mess. None of that means nothing is happening. It may only mean you are a human being and not a machine that switches states on command. A lot of voices talk as if real conversion has to feel overwhelming and immediate. One touch from God, and every desire shifts, every habit dissolves, every doubt vanishes, every wound seals shut overnight. That makes for a powerful testimony. It also makes for a brutal expectation, because the person whose process moves slower starts to assume their faith is thinner, weaker, somehow less real than the dramatic version. But not every life can survive a violent turn. And honestly, not every life should. If a ship is out in rough water, you don't snap at 90 degrees across the waves. You'll capsize the whole thing. You make smaller corrections, you adjust the heading, you stabilize before you dare to overcorrect. I think a lot of people are built exactly like that, especially the ones already carrying more than they can name. When someone is disoriented, traumatized, exhausted, or simply fractured, a dramatic swing isn't always transformation. Sometimes it's just one more form of instability dressed up as breakthrough. Sometimes the holier move is the smaller move. A little more honesty, a little less running, a little more willingness to face what you already know is true. That may not feel dramatic enough to count for much, but I promise you it counts. And this is where people get confused about grace. They think the only options are these. God changes me instantly, or I'm left to save myself through sheer effort. That was never the real choice. Grace and orientation were never enemies. Grace may be the opening. Orientation is how that opening gets lived. Grace isn't always a lightning strike that ends the story in a single, unmistakable flash of light. Sometimes it's the space to keep turning. Other times it's the way the truth refuses to leave you alone, or that you can no longer settle back into what you used to call normal. Grace doesn't always arrive like force. Often it arrives like pressure, a steady pull you can ignore for a while, but never quite forever. That may not be the story people want, but it's closer to most lives. Because most people aren't converted in one emotional blast and then finished. Most are being formed slowly, over years, learning to tell conviction apart from shame, learning which habits distort them and which ones hold them steady. Learning how to keep facing the right direction, even when the weather turns ugly and the horizon disappears. That is still spiritual life. That is still real. Slow reorientation is not fake faith. Incremental change is not counterfeit. You do not need a spectacular story for God to be present in your life. I've spent years trying to understand how the quiet kind of change works, in others and in myself. For as long as I can remember, I have believed. That's the truth underneath it. Belief was never the thing I was wrestling toward, which means the lightning would have had nothing to strike. But that is exactly why conversion has always fascinated me. Not only as a doctrine to defend, as an experience to understand, the way a person moves from one orientation into another slowly, almost without noticing. The way something starts pulling at them before they even have language for it. The way they finally stop running from what they already sense is true. I've watched people walk through that and tried to understand it. And what I keep finding is that almost no one's story looks the way they were told it should. Most weren't overpowered, they were reoriented, a degree at a time, a decision at a time, a correction at a time. Some met God in collision, others meet him in steady correction. Some can name one exact day it happened. Others can only say, I don't know when it began, but I know I am no longer facing the same direction. And that counts too. Most of life isn't lived in dramatic revelation. Most of life is lived in repetition. Choice, pattern, attention, course correction, drift, and then return. That is where orientation actually happens. Not only in the moment that inspires you, in the quieter moments that simply require you to keep going. Ships don't reach the shore by one heroic turn. They hold a bearing long enough for it to matter. Long enough for the destination itself to change, a degree at a time. Maybe faith works far more like that than we've been taught. Not always sudden, not always loud, not always overwhelming. Sometimes just steady, sometimes almost frustratingly gradual, but still real, still meaningful, still grace. So let me ask it straight. If slow and quiet is how most transformation actually happens, why are we still so quick to decide that God only ever shows up in the dramatic?